Hi, welcome once again to Senior Focus. I'm your host, Bill Adams. Senior Focus is a show designed for adults over the age of about 50 or so. But of course, if you're younger than that, please stay tuned because we're going to have information that might be applicable to your family or your neighbors. Before we get started, I wanted to say thanks to Greg Roten. Greg is with Armstrong's Channel 20 and 100. He brings the show to you a couple times each month. And also thanks to Keith Kaiser from the Mill Creek Metro Parks. Keith allows us to use the Davis Visitor Center, and please come out and visit the center anytime during the year. Today we're going to be talking with Teresa Rice. Teresa's a social worker with the Adult Protective Service Agency in Mahoning County. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Teresa, why don't at the beginning we talk about where people can contact Adult Protective Services, where you're located, that kind of information.
We're located at the Renaissance Building on Oak Hill.
Okay.
And they can call our regular number at 330-884-6952. And when they call, they want to leave their name, a contact number. And if they're calling about a particular case of Adult Protection Services, they'll need to leave that person's full name if they have it, an address if they have that, a phone number, their date of birth if they have that, and a brief description of what they feel or the reason that the person is being abused, neglected, or self-neglected or exploited.
And we're going to get into that, all the different cases you handle, what the different types of possible abuse or neglect are. How long have you been working with the agency?
I've been with the agency for 27 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but I've been in the Adult Protection Unit for about 15 years.
Okay. So you've probably seen quite a few things.
Yes, I have.
A good experience of all the cases that come in.
Yes.
And you mentioned how people can call in and give some specifics. Did they have to give their name?
No, they don't have to. We have anonymous calls that people will call in and not leave a name, and sometimes we don't have a phone number of the person that called either. But if they could just leave the information of who they feel, that person's name, like I said, the address, a phone number if that person has a phone number of who they feel is being abused or neglected or self-neglected or exploited.
But it would help, I'm sure.
Yes, it would.
Your situation, yeah. Because the person who's calling is going to have the information. I mean, they're going to have a knowledge of that. Do you find that you get calls from neighbors, or where do most of the calls come from?
Most of the calls come from some family members. It might be an adult child or grandchild. Some neighbors, we get calls from friends of that person. Maybe they're going over to visit them and they see some abuse or something different about what's going on in the household. Maybe there's an adult child they're living with their parent or parents, and they feel that that person's being neglected. Of their signs, maybe they feel that they want to report it, and that's when we get a lot of calls from those particular people.
And I would imagine a lot of this kind of comes down to a balance between an adult's, we all have the right to live as we choose versus the need for safety, where people need to, be, again, sometimes it gets, I imagine this gets real sticky sometimes in competence and things like that.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so, once you take the information, what's your next step?
Once the information is taken from our phone service, our Unit 8 will then return that information over to, it's a referral that's written up or typed up. The referrals go to our supervisor, and then at that point, she assigns the referrals to, there's 3 other social workers in the unit besides myself that handle the whole county of Mahoning. So they get distributed evenly, and once they're distributed, we go out and visit and do an assessment on these referrals. We don't call them initially. It's always unannounced. Okay. Because we have to see what's really going on. And then once we go out and if we can gain entry, we do an assessment on that person or persons, and then determine what we feel is going on, and then go from there and decide on what, maybe they might need some home health in the house. Maybe they need sometimes you go in and they don't have food. Sometimes their electricity is off. Their gases could be off, their water could be off, and there's other agencies that we deal with that we would refer them to see if they can get some help for those particular things.
What about if you can't gain access?
If we
what do you do?
can't gain access, there is a letter that we leave, notice of intent it's called, meaning the reason that we were there, it states, and why we came to visit as far as the abuse, neglect, self-neglect, and exploitation. And normally, if we don't gain access with that letter, we usually get a call. And then from that point, we can go out and visit. That way, they know we're coming for sure then.
Now, do most of the people, once you get involved, do they end up staying in the home? Or are there, a lot of cases where people maybe need to go to a hospital or something
Right.
like
There's
that?
some cases where we do have to call the police to gain entry. And then there's cases that we feel that need the police there because maybe a person is living in just a horrible situation. And it's not good for them. So what we do, we'll call the police, and you were talking about competency.
Right.
If we find that they're not competent, which we're not the doctors, but there's some things we go through with a mini mental. We can determine if they're competent or not, and then there's some situations where maybe they're physical that they need to be hospitalized. And if they don't want to go, the police, we call them and we get escorts from them where they would go ahead and possibly, if it's possible, they would pink slip them.
What does that mean?
Meaning they would pink slip them into the hospital. That's if the person has refused to go and we know that they need to be, it's urgent that they need to be in the hospital to get checked.
Okay,
Meaning they would be taken to emergency.
I see, okay. Do you work at all with the probate court?
Yes, sir.
And maybe explain about how that might work.
Probate court, like I was saying before, if the person, we find them incompetent, and we work also with guardianship.
Okay,
And guardianship, with that information, what I've done my assessment on, I refer that to guardianship, and in turn, they go out and do their assessment, and with a licensed physician evaluation, competency evaluation on that person, we could use that, and then guardianship would determine, okay, they find them incompetent. With that information, they go down to court, Youngstown Courthouse, in the probate court, and they file a hearing for probate, for
Okay.
guardianship.
and who are some of the guardians? Are there agencies that become guardians for folks?
That would be the guardianship there at, I forgot the name of it.
Is that the one on Marmion?
Yes, sir.
Compasses?
Compass Family and
okay.
Service, yes.
Yeah. And so in other cases, again, that's an extreme.
Yes, sir.
Most of the time, though, you probably don't go.
We do go a lot to
Oh,
court.
you do?
Yeah.
Okay, because there is something there.
Right, and then
Okay.
sometimes we try and allow the family member, if there's a family member that wants to be the guardian, if the person is in need of a guardian, we try to deal with the family first before we actually go that far to assess it, to have guardianship come out and assess it, and then have them file it at probate court. We always try to keep the family involved if they're willing.
Right.
Right.
Now, I think you said you've been doing this for 15 years? Okay. In that time, have you seen an increase in the need?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, there are a
When
lot
I
more
first,
people?
oh yes, when I first started in the unit, it wasn't as prominent where we had a lot of APS cases. We had some, but there wasn't an awful lot, and they've gotten worse too. A lot of more abuse, a lot of exploitation cases.
Okay.
Yes.
And let's talk about that. Abuse, the different types of abuse. There's physical, I guess, right? There's emotional, maybe?
There is
Financial, yeah.
Yes, there's self-neglect, meaning that that person just has not been caring for themselves. You can see their demeanor, they're unkempt. Maybe they had a neat appearance at one time, and you can see them going down. Or their houses could be hoarders in that instance too. There's also neglect. Neglect meaning if there's someone there that's been caring for that elderly person and they're not doing what they used to do. In some of those same situations, you can see where they've gone down, where their clothes could be tattered or they're not being fed properly because they can't do it for themselves. There's also the abuse, which would be physical or emotional. And then there's the exploitation, where that person or persons who's in that person's life, maybe not even living with them, they're coming in and just taking, literally stealing their money outright.
Right. saying that they're,
Maybe they need it for,
well, drugs possibly.
that's a possibility.
Or gambling or something.
Gambling, car repairs, whatever, but there's a lot of exploitation cases that we've gotten recently too, and I've seen a lot of that. Like I said, from when I first started, it's just gotten worse, and there's so many other cases that we don't even hear about.
Now, you've got 4 people total now,
Yes.
right? Is that an increase recently, or is that about the
Yes.
same staffing? Yeah.
We had just recently an opening, and one of the young ladies in the agency just transferred into the unit.
Okay.
She's been there about a year and a half.
What about if somebody calls on a weekend or evening? How does that work?
They have to call Help Hotline, and Help
Okay.
Hotline will take any referrals that we have, and then from there, they fax the information to us.
Now, if it's an emergency, if something's happening right away, do you suggest people call 911? Or,
Oh, yes, sir,
yeah.
absolutely. They can hang the phone up and just dial 911 for the police or whomever they may feel they need an emergency.
Right. With 4 people, though, in the whole county, and you're talking about, do you know the approximate amount of cases that you guys get in a year?
Approximately. Offhand, I am not exactly sure, but I know per month we can get at least up to 200 cases a
Oh,
month.
I was going to say,
Yeah.
just a guess is 1,000 a year, so it's more than that.
Yes.
Okay. How does this compare to like child abuse or child neglect? I mean, my understanding, and I'm just going on what I've read, is that we put a big emphasis on child abuse maybe 20 years ago, and that adult abuse and the response has been kind of behind the curve. I mean, is that what you see, or?
I've seen that, and actually when before I got into the unit, I didn't know anything about adult protection services. And now that I've been doing it, and I'm comparing it to children's service or children abuse or neglect, it's just about the same, but except it's adults who we work with of 60 and over, and they have to live in their homes in order for us to do an assessment.
Right. Do you find the older adults are more vulnerable? Let's say, I know you cover, over 60? So do you find more 80 plus or 85 plus people?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So they're more like...
Some of them are competent, and some of them are not. And then, like you said, that they could be more vulnerable, just like children. They can't help themselves. They can't protect themselves.
When let's going back to the financial exploitation, which I guess has been increasing quite a bit, right? Are you able to get access to bank accounts and things like that?
Yes, what we do, because sometimes we get referrals from the banks, and if they feel that it's a major problem, they can give us copies of certain particular items out of the person's statements or whatever to see what is actually going on. Because I had a case like that once, and the son was actually exploiting his mom. She hadn't realized it because he was telling her other things about what he was doing with the money when he really wasn't. But we called the bank, and we did speak to one of the tellers, and she was able to give us information to see exactly what was going on in her account. And we had to take it over to show her, and she was so upset. Yeah.
Do the adults press charges in those cases, or are they reluctant?
Very reluctant at times, and they know it, what has been going on, and won't do anything about it because they don't want their adult child or their relative to go to jail. I've had that situation where it's been obvious, and that person knows that they're being neglected, or exploited, and don't want to do anything about it.
And is that the case even with abuse, physical abuse?
Physical and mental abuse also. And if they're in their right mind, there's not a lot we can do. We can monitor them to make sure that they're not going to be, I guess you can say, it gets any worse.
Right. Yeah. How does the follow-up work on that? I mean, once you've worked on a case, do you go back to see the people?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And
at times,
that's unannounced, I imagine, right?
Right, absolutely. And at times I've noticed when I realize the person doesn't want to press any charges, and I'll tell them in front of the perpetrator, I'm going to come back and keep visiting you to make sure you're going to be okay. And they agree to it usually.
Yeah.
And at times it does stop.
Yeah, I imagine, again, the reason people wouldn't want to press charges, besides the fact that it's their own flesh and blood or the kin, is that they're afraid of what, institutional, going to a nursing home? Is that basically
That
it?
too, they're afraid that if that person leaves them, who's supposed to be helping them, that means they'll be by themselves and they may have to be removed from their home. But that's not our job to remove them from their home unless we find that they need some type of care. Like I said, if they have to go to the hospital, or if they just can't live at home by themselves. We always suggest it, but if they're not competent to understand and see that this is what they need, we just go through with the guardianship.
Right. But and again, on the show, we've had many home care support services. So there's a wide array of services that are out there.
Absolutely.
Would you talk a little bit about that, about some of the things that you might recommend or get involved in?
Some of the things that I recommend are if they need home health in their home, maybe they need somebody to come in and just help them do some tidying up in the house or cook a small meal for them. And then the meals also, there's meals delivered through Easter sales. They could do that also, but they may need somebody to just come in and a nurse check on them to make sure their vitals are okay. Now I can tell you this, we do offer in our unit also homemaker services and transportation.
Oh, okay.
Right, and the homemaker services is where they do come in, they do light cleaning, light dusting, they clean their kitchen, their bedroom, bathroom, different stuff like that. We also offer grocery shopping, where they would pay for the groceries, they give them a list, and they go out into the nearest grocery store. And then we also, in that homemaker services, they do laundry, where they would do a reasonable amount of laundry. If they didn't have it, washer and dryer in their home, they could just go to the nearest laundromat, or if they're in an apartment complex, to their washer and dryer there, and they pay for all of that. And then as far as the transportation, you have to be on Medicaid to be eligible for that.
Okay. Do you work with the Agency on Aging at all?
Yes, sir.
With
Yes,
Passport?
we do. Yes, we do.
Okay.
I refer some cases also to them.
And if you don't mind, because there may be people out there that don't understand Passport or what the agency does, you want to explain a little bit about what they...
Passport works, they network with different agencies, home health agencies also, where they could send somebody in, and they have more access to do a little bit more personal care than, because we don't offer personal care. Meaning, like I said, they could come in and help them bathe, they could just help them get dressed daily. They, I'm not sure, I know they offer transportation a little bit too, but we do a lot of the transportation through our agency.
And where does the transportation take people? To the doctor?
Takes them to their doctors.
Yeah.
It'll pick them up from their home and take them straight to the doctors, and then they'll be around to pick them back up and take them back home. And all of that is through the county.
Now, this is a county-wide service in Mahoning County.
Yes, sir.
But if somebody were watching who lives in Trumbull or any county in Ohio, they have other...
Right. They could check with their Trumbull County Jobs and Family Services. They offer it in those counties as well.
Okay. And we were talking a little before the show. I know there's an effort to maybe improve adult protective services statewide, but that hasn't taken effect yet. I mean, they're just in the talking stages, I guess.
Yes.
And if that happens, hopefully you'll get more funding.
That's what we want. We always said that we need funding for, because a lot of times when a person's taken from their home because they can't live there, maybe it was tagged for whatever reasons, we don't have emergency housing.
Okay.
And we try to maybe find a relative that would take them in. Or, rescue mission is not good for the elderly because of the stairs, I guess they have. They can't go up and down the steps. Sometimes we try to find relatives that will take them in, and we're usually successful with that at times also.
What about some other agencies? Again, we've talked about the Agency on Aging. Would you work with maybe the sheriff's office at all?
Absolutely. We work with the sheriff's office. A lot of times, if I find that if it's an abuse case, and it's something, for me reading it seems pretty detrimental for me to just go out by myself, I'll call the police department or sheriff's department to see if I can get an escort to go out with us.
Oh, good. Okay. Does the same thing happen in the city, Youngstown City Police?
Oh, yeah. And we work with not just Youngstown. We work with Struthers, all the outlying areas in Mahoning County, Camel, Poland, Austintown, Canfield. We go far as out to I was in New Middletown yesterday.
Or Sebring.
Sebring, Beloit, North Jackson.
So you find self-neglect and possible abuse all over
On
the
all
county?
those, absolutely.
It's not restricted to
No, it's not.
one area of town or anything like that?
Not at all.
Yeah. Again, if the public is, people are out there watching, and there are neighbors or family members of seniors, what are some of the signs or what are some of the things they could look for in possible abuse?
I would look for mainly, if the person lived by themselves and you see them daily coming out, even they just come out to get their mail or the newspaper, or if they're driving and then all of a sudden you don't see them for a long time. Or if you know that you can probably see lights on in the house, maybe you don't see lights on or the blinds are down all the time. Their trash cans sitting out, maybe trash didn't, they picked the trash up, but the waste basket wasn't put back in. What else? I would just say not being able to see them, you don't see them that often.
What if somebody's a family member, how about signs of physical abuse?
Or if you see bruises on them, if you happen to visit them or you're going over to visit them often and you go over and maybe sit down and have a cup of coffee with them and you see an obvious bruise, and sometimes when you see the bruises you can ask and they may not always tell you the truth. And if you find that there are bruises, you can report that, because we've gotten reports on that.
Now, again, it's difficult, I imagine. One of the most difficult things must be the competency issue.
Yes, sir.
Where, you see that somebody's living less than desirable, I guess. And I think of the TV show, Hoarders.
Yes, I've been into stuff like that.
Yeah, but you want to describe about how that's not necessarily a reason all the time for somebody to be
of hoarders, if you see that.
Taken out,
well, my philosophy, and it's usually true, where you see this, and maybe you've not seen this person, you just don't know the person, but that's the way they've always lived.
Right.
And they find it to be normal, but you don't think it's normal, and we get calls on that, and it just doesn't happen overnight. It's been over the period of time, and maybe it's been like that all the time. We have to investigate to get in to talk to them to see exactly where they're at with that.
But you said before that you do what's called a mini mental exam. So those are specific questions?
Right. The questions could be as far as what's your first and last name, what's your address, how long have you lived at your house, what's your date of birth, what is the date today, what is the month, what's the year, what season is it, who's our President of the United States, little things that we think they should know.
And again, if they are having problems with that, that's when you possibly...
and if you ask them, say this is 2016 now.
Right.
And I've gotten it where I've asked them, what year is it? And they might say 1939.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
obvious.
Indication.
Yes.
Again, we're talking with Teresa Rice. Teresa is a social worker with Adult Protective Services. At this point, you want to give contact information again?
Yes, the contact information would be to call 330-884-6952, and you would leave your phone number if you need to. You would leave the name of the person you're calling about. You would leave their phone number, their complete address, and age, and a date of birth, and give us a brief description on the situation that you feel is happening to that person so that we can investigate it.
And again, you mentioned maybe 200 calls a month or more come in. Would you know approximately how many are self-neglect versus the abuse, or were there somebody outside involved?
Approximately, out of self-neglect, there could be maybe about 60.
Okay.
Most of them, or a lot of them, are self-neglect.
Okay, a lot of self-neglect. Yeah. And again, just with the demographics of the area, with people getting older, families moving out.
Absolutely.
People are left alone, and so you have a lot more, I guess, now.
Yes, we do.
Yeah. Are there teams of, other agencies that, do you guys ever get together and discuss cases where I'm thinking about maybe the sheriff or the police or maybe, you know, we talked about how bankers can be effective.
Right. There's a lot of nursing homes that that come over and they sit and talk with us about different situations where, as if the person has to be placed, what we can do to work with them to get them placed.
Okay.
There are the hospitals. We have gone and done presentations at the hospitals also. We try to keep in touch with a lot of the different agencies who we actually work with. Maybe the person has to be placed in a nursing home or assisted living, just to keep our open conversation so that we'll know, okay, we think about, okay, maybe they need to go here or call the particular agency to have them placed for whatever reasons.
And that's a good point. You work with people who are still in the home.
Yes, sir.
But if somebody saw a neglect or abuse in a nursing home or another assisted living type situation?
There's ombudsman, and they are through Area Agency on Aging. They can call them to get to the ombudsman.
Okay. Do you ever work in tandem with them at all?
Yes, sir. Yes, we have.
Cases? Okay.
Absolutely.
Is there, you know, we have a minute or two to go. Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you wanted to mention? Do you do any kind of outreach to the community where, you know, maybe
Yes, we have our senior day every year in October. And we normally have a lot of things for seniors and awareness of what abuse, neglect, self-neglect, and exploitation is in case they feel they're being abused in any way. And we give out little gifts and stuff like that, but it's every year we do that. And
again, if people are out there, and this could be professional folks too, it doesn't have to be just family members.
No, it doesn't.
I'm thinking, again, like bankers, especially, you know, I've heard stories where, again, tellers were like real heroes because somebody came in with an elder and it was just out of the ordinary and they were making large numbers of withdrawals or a large amount. So that's where you might get a call.
Right, absolutely. And you know, the tellers are the ones who know because they see you often.
Right.
And they know if you come in there by yourself. Then they notice if someone comes in with you, and they notice when you've been taking out extraordinary amounts that just don't seem normal. They can be, they help us out a lot with that.
So if people are out there and you see one of the situations we've been discussing about self-neglect or physical abuse or financial exploitation, they give you guys a call?
Absolutely, at 330-884-6952.
Okay, and we've been talking with Teresa Rice. Teresa, 15 years?
Yes, sir.
With the Jobs and Family Services.
Oh, in the unit. 27 years altogether.
Oh, I'm sorry, I don't want to take away those other years. But in this particular work.
Yes, sir.
And again, thanks for being on the front lines.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate your coming in. Again, you've been watching Senior Focus. I'm your host, Bill Adams. We come to you a couple times each month through Armstrong's Channel 20 and 100, and thank you to Greg Roten. And also thanks to Keith Kaiser from the Mill Creek Metro Parks. He allows us to use the beautiful Davis Visitor Center. And until next time, thank you for watching.